It was a moment conceived in the quiet defiance of a legend who refused to be bound by the assumed limits of man. The air was sterile, charged with the sharp scent of ozone and skepticism, in a private Los Angeles facility far from the glare of Hollywood. On one side stood Bruce Lee, a compact symphony of coiled potential, holding nothing but a pair of ordinary bamboo chopsticks. 20 feet away, resting in the steady hands of a police marksman, was a loaded, .22 caliber pistol. This was not a film set. There were no stunt coordinators, no rubber bullets, and no second takes. Every scientific text, every understood principle of human biology and Newtonian physics, declared what was about to be attempted a literal impossibility. It was more than a stunt, it was a direct confrontation. Bruce Lee, with only wooden will, was preparing to catch a speeding bullet. The year was 1972. Bruce Lee existed at a curious crossroads of global fame and profound professional frustration. He had just completed principal photography on Enter the Dragon, a film he knew would catapult him to international stardom. His physical prowess was the stuff of legend, a 1-inch punch that could send a man staggering backward, kicks delivered faster than the human eye could track, a physique honed to whipcord leanness. He moved with a fluid, terrifying grace that seemed to warp reality. Yet, for all the awe he inspired, a persistent undercurrent of doubt followed him. In boardrooms, on sets, and in martial arts circles, whispers had calcified into a dismissive consensus among skeptics. It was all camera tricks, slow-motion photography, clever editing, hidden wires, the magic of cinema. These, they claimed, were the true sources of his superhuman speed. The genuine article, they argued, could not possibly be that fast. The human nervous system had hard limits, and Bruce Lee, they believed, was simply an excellent performer enhanced by technology. For a man whose entire philosophy was built upon authenticity, directness, and the absolute truth of the physical self, this dismissal was a poison. It wasn't just an attack on his skill, it was an attack on his life's work, on the very principles of Jeet Kune, which demanded efficiency and reality above all. He grew weary of the debate, tired of proving himself in arguments. He needed a demonstration so unambiguous, so empirically verifiable, that it would silence the whispers forever. It had to be an event removed from the subjective world of cinema, one that would live squarely in the objective realm of measurement and fact. He didn't want believers, he wanted witnesses who could not refute their own data. And so, he devised a test of terrifying simplicity. He would catch a bullet mid-flight. To give the experiment unimpeachable credibility, he knew he needed the most stringent critic he could find. He didn't seek out a fellow martial artist or an admiring journalist, he sought a scientist. His invitation was extended to Dr. Richard Hayes, a respected physicist from UCLA, a man whose career was built on the bedrock of empirical evidence and the debunking of pseudoscience. Dr. Hayes was a professional skeptic, a scholar who had spent over 20 years mapping the rigid architecture of human limitation. He had published papers on neurophysiology, conducted thousands of reaction time tests, and taught graduate courses on the biological constraints that govern every human movement. His world was one of milliseconds, synaptic delays, and conduction velocities. When Bruce Lee presented his proposal, Dr. Hayes listened with the polite incredulity of a man hearing a claim of perpetual motion. The physicist's initial response was a lecture, a gentle but firm schooling in the incontrovertible math of impossibility. He explained it to Lee with the patience of a teacher. The human reaction time, he said, is not a matter of training, it is a matter of biology. A visual stimulus, like the flash of a gun, takes roughly 13 milliseconds just to travel from the retina to the visual cortex via the optic nerve. The brain then needs a minimum of 150 milliseconds to process that signal, recognize it as a threat, and formulate a response. The motor cortex must then activate, sending its own electrical command down the spinal cord, which takes another 30 milliseconds. Finally, the signal reaches the hand muscles, requiring 20 more milliseconds to initiate contraction. This was the absolute best-case scenario, a simple reflex to a single expected stimulus. For a complex, coordinated movement requiring spatial calculation and precise motor control, like positioning chopsticks in the path of a bullet, add at least another 100 milliseconds. The total? A minimum of 313 milliseconds from flash to movement. Then Dr. Hayes presented the other side of the equation. The .22 long rifle bullet, traveling at approximately 1,200 feet per second, would cover the 20-foot distance between the muzzle and Bruce Lee's face in about 50 milliseconds. The conclusion was brutally simple. The bullet would have struck its target, passed through it, and embedded itself in the wall behind 263 milliseconds before Bruce Lee's nervous system could even begin to tell his hand to move. It was not a question of difficulty, it was a question of fundamental physics. The numbers did not lie. Furthermore, Hayes argued, even if by some miracle Lee could move fast enough, the wooden chopsticks would offer no resistance. The kinetic energy of the bullet, calculated by the formula 1/2 mass times velocity squared, was immense. Striking the chopsticks head-on would shatter the bamboo into splinters instantly. The bullet would barely slow. The entire proposition, Hayes concluded, was a tragic fantasy. Bruce Lee listened to this meticulous breakdown with respectful attention, absorbing every detail. When the physicist finished, Lee did not argue with the equations. Instead, he reframed the premise. "Dr. Hayes," he said, his voice calm and focused, "your calculations are perfect, but they assume the average untrained human nervous system. They assume a conscious reaction process, see, think, then act. What if the reaction becomes unconscious? What if 25 years of daily obsessive training can rewire those biological pathways? What if it creates new neural connections that bypass the conscious mind entirely? I am not asking you to believe it is possible based on your theories. I am only asking you to watch me do it. And then, afterward, you can use all your scientific knowledge to explain what you just saw." Intrigued, despite his profound skepticism, and honor-bound by the scientific method's demand for evidence, Dr. Hayes agreed. But he set conditions of absolute rigor. He would control every variable. He would provide the gun and the ammunition, personally inspecting and loading the weapon. Lee would not be allowed to touch the firearm or the bullets beforehand. Hayes would assemble a full team of researchers, physicists, neurologists, and engineers, and they would bring the most advanced measuring equipment available. There would be no room for illusion. For 3 days, the sterile facility was transformed into a high-tech laboratory. The team installed a bank of phantom high-speed cameras, capable of capturing 10,000 frames per second, fast enough to see the bullet rotate in flight and measure movement down to a single millisecond. They set up electromagnetic motion sensors on Bruce's body, pressure-sensitive pads on the floor, and electromyography, EMG, electrodes on his forearm to detect the precise moment his muscles fired. Laser rangefinders confirmed the exact distance. Chronographs measured the bullet's velocity. Microphones were arrayed to triangulate the sound of the shot and the impact. Every piece of data would be cross-referenced, every moment documented from multiple angles. This was not a stage show. It was a peer-reviewed experiment waiting to happen. On the day of the test, the atmosphere was taut with a grim academic certainty. The scientists moved with the quiet efficiency of men preparing to record a foregone conclusion. The gun, a standard Ruger Mark II target pistol, lay on a table next to a box of 22 long rifle cartridges. Dr. Hayes meticulously inspected a single bullet, showed it to the witnesses, and loaded it into the magazine. He worked with the solemnity of a ritual. The marksman, a veteran firearms instructor, took his position at the 20-foot mark, his stance solid, his breathing controlled. Bruce Lee, meanwhile, prepared in silence. He wore simple black training clothes. He selected a pair of chopsticks from a common restaurant-style packet, flexing them slightly before holding them loosely in his right hand. He did not tense his muscles. Instead, he seemed to settle into a profound state of relaxation. As sensors were attached to his skin, the monitors displayed a curious fact. His resting heart rate was dropping, settling into the low 40 seconds, a state of deep meditation. He was not preparing for a frantic reaction. He was entering a state of heightened, tranquil awareness. He explained his approach not as stopping force with force, but redirecting it. He described it in almost hydraulic terms. The bullet has momentum. I do not oppose it. I meet it and guide it, changing its angle. It is like changing the course of a stream, not by blocking it, but by offering it a new path. To Dr. Hayes, it still sounded like philosophical metaphor, not physical strategy. The scientist's face was set in a mask of polite doubt. He called everyone to their positions. Bruce stood on his mark, facing the shooter, his left hand held loosely behind his back. His eyes were locked on the pistol's barrel, unblinking. The room fell into a silence so complete that the hum of the camera equipment seemed deafening. 15 people, scientists, technicians, a few trusted observers, held their breath. Dr. Hayes's voice cut through the quiet, adhering to the strict protocol. We will commence the countdown. You must react to the muzzle flash, Mr. Lee. Not the sound, not the movement of the shooter's finger, the flash of light. Any anticipatory movement will invalidate the test. Do you understand? Bruce gave a single slight nod, his gaze never wavering. 3. Bruce's breathing became almost imperceptible. The EMG sensors showed no pre-activation in his forearm muscles. He was perfectly still, a statue of concentration. 2. His focus deepened, his peripheral vision seeming to dissolve. The world narrowed to a tunnel, at the end of which was the dark circle of the gun's muzzle. He was not thinking, he was perceiving. He was attuned to the micro-tremors in the marksman's posture, the subtle tension in his trigger finger, the barely detectable shift in his breathing rhythm. 1,000 unconscious signals that preached an intention before the body acted. 1. Time for Bruce seemed to undergo a strange dilation. Seconds stretched. His conscious mind was quiet, an observer in its own house. Control had been ceded to a deeper trained intelligence within his nervous system. Fire. The command was given. In that instant, several things happened in a sequence that would later require slow-motion film to unravel. The marksman's finger completed its squeeze. The firing pin struck the primer. The gunpowder ignited. But before the propellant gases had even fully expanded to propel the bullet down the barrel, before the bright flash of light was visible to any conscious observer in the room, Bruce Lee's body received a signal. It was not the flash. It was the prediction of the flash, synthesized from the cascade of precursor cues his hyper-trained perception had compiled. His muscles fired. On the high-speed film, it would show his hand, a blur even at 10,000 frames per second, beginning its forward and slightly lateral motion, a staggering 0. 3 milliseconds after the muzzle flash became visible, this was the number that would later haunt Dr. Hayes. 0.3 of a millisecond. It was an order of magnitude faster than any documented human reaction. It was faster than a nerve impulse could travel the length of his arm. By all accounts, it was impossible. The bullet, a small piece of lead and copper, exited the barrel at over 1,000 feet per second, spinning through the air. In the handful of milliseconds it took to cross the 20-foot gap, Bruce Lee's hand had already traveled its arc. He did not make a grabbing motion. He presented the chopsticks in a 5, orienting them at a precise 30-degree angle to the bullet's path. He was not a wall awaiting a crash. He was a ramp awaiting a deflection. Impact. The sound was not a crack or a thud, but a sharp, high ping, the sound of metal meeting dense bamboo at an oblique angle. The bullet's kinetic energy, instead of being absorbed head-on, was converted. A portion continued forward, but its vector was altered, pushing it upward into the narrowing gap of the chopsticks. The remaining energy was dissipated as heat and compression, the bamboo fibers buckling and compacting along their grain rather than fracturing across it. The laws of physics were not broken, they were meticulously obeyed in a more sophisticated way than the scientists had considered. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. Then Bruce Lee slowly lowered his hand. He turned it and with deliberate calm opened the chopsticks. There, cradled in the groove between them, was the bullet. It was misshapen, its nose flattened and smeared from the impact, but it was intact. It was real. It was captured. The silence in the room deepened, transforming from anticipation to stunned disbelief. The scientists stared, their minds struggling to reconcile what they knew to be true with what they had just witnessed. Dr. Hayes stood motionless, his face pale. The data streaming across the monitors confirmed the visual miracle. The bullet had been fired. The bullet had been caught. All the sensors agreed. The subsequent analysis was a period of intense, quiet turmoil for the scientific team. They pored over the high-speed footage, running it frame by frame, measuring, calculating, and remeasuring. The 0.3 millisecond reaction time was the most jarring anomaly. Hayes gathered his team, checking and rechecking the calibration of the timing equipment, searching for a sync error, a software glitch, anything that could explain the impossible number. They found none. The equipment was functioning perfectly. The evidence was pristine. It was Bruce who offered the explanation that would allow science to begin processing the event. He reviewed the footage with the researchers, pointing not to his hand, but to the shooter. "Look here," he said, indicating the frames before the flash. "See the tension build in his shoulder? See the final, minute contraction of his finger muscle before the trigger breaks? I did not react to the light. My body responded to the intention. The flash was merely the confirmation that my timing was correct, allowing for a microscopic adjustment mid-motion. The movement had already begun." He described a state beyond reaction, predictive response. 25 years of training had not made his nerves conduct electricity faster. It had built a library of micro-expressions and physiological tells into his subconscious. It had wired his cerebellum to execute complex motor programs based on predictive cues, bypassing the slower conscious processing centers of the brain entirely. He hadn't shortened the nerve pathway. He had built a shorter, automated detour. The analysis of the chopsticks and bullet provided the final piece of the puzzle. The 30-degree angle was the key. By not meeting the force directly, Bruce had dramatically reduced the perpendicular force component the bamboo had to withstand. The energy that would have shattered the wood was instead translated into a deflective force, friction, and heat. It was a masterclass in applied mechanics, executed under unimaginable pressure. In the weeks and months that followed, Dr. Hayes and his colleagues compiled their findings. They published accounts in specialized journals, not as proof of the paranormal, but as a documented case study that challenged the existing models of human performance. They spoke of extraordinary predictive motor control and highly attuned perceptual pre-processing. The event was entered into the scientific record not as a myth, but as an anomaly that pointed to the vast untapped potential of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through intense, deliberate practice. For Bruce Lee, the demonstration served its purpose. The whispers about camera tricks and movie magic lost their authority in the face of calibrated cameras, and physicists signed affidavits. He had moved the debate from subjective opinion to objective fact. But more importantly, the event stood as the ultimate testament to his philosophy. It was not about superpowers or magic. It was about the total mastery of the self. It was about the relentless, decade-long dedication to refining the instrument of the body and mind, until it could perform in harmony with the laws of the universe, not in defiance of them. The bullet catch was not a trick. It was a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence he had spent his life writing, that the only true limits are those we accept in our own minds. He had taken the impossible, held it in his hand, and shown it to be merely the not yet achieved. And in doing so, he left a permanent question etched into the annals of both science and human endeavor. If this is possible, what else are we simply not yet trained to see?